But when I checked in with the team, they were getting some indications that there would be some form of ambush or some sort of attack on the convoy as they were making their way to where they needed to go. And so that happened pretty shortly after we checked in. And so immediately had to execute one of those procedures to get below the weather so that way we could support the team. Luckily, a lot of smart folks put a lot of time and effort in figuring out how best to do that. And so when I executed it, it worked like it was supposed to.
Major General Drowley currently serves as the commander of the Air Force Operational Test and Evaluation Center at Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico, where he oversees the evaluation of over 98 major acquisition programs valued at more than $1 trillion, ensuring the readiness and effectiveness of warfighting capabilities across the Air Force, across the Space Force, and even into joint coalitions.
How we got below the weather to operate was still a little bit of a risky procedure. We tried to mitigate as much of that risk as we could with trying to remove as many variables as possible.
How did you, find the courage to blindly fly through a canyon when you could hit a mountain at any moment?
There's a lot of I that's bouncing around in my head at that time. Like, I'm worried about this. I may screw up. I may not do what I need to do. I may catastrophically fail.
What's up, Josh here, and I got a quick update for you before we get back to the episode. Just give me 30 seconds of your time because there's two things that I just have to say to you. And the first is just a tremendous thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening and tuning into the show week after week. It means the world to us, and it really is a dream come true to not only be sharing the incredible stories of these guests, but to then inspire so many of you listeners. It has become my life's purpose, and I cannot thank you enough for supporting me and so many others on this journey of positivity. But secondly, it's a dream where I feel like we are just getting started, and the sky is the limit. I am so excited to see where this goes, and I'm so blessed to have you on this journey. And if you appreciate this message, if you appreciate what we do here at the Hero Front Podcast, please follow us on this app. Hit subscribe. Now, if you do that, here's the promise that I'm going to make to you. I am going to do everything in my power to make this show as good as I possibly can now and going forward. We're going to deliver the guests that you want me to speak to. We're going to have the topics that you want to hear about. And of course, we're going to keep doing all the things that you've always loved about the podcast. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Now let's get back to the show and let's get after it. Why this blows my mind that this conversation's happening is because I actually knew about you years ago, and I didn't know when I met you that you were that person that I've read about years ago, right? And I'm talking about your story with Simon Sinek.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's a few airmen featured in his books. I've spoken to Colonel Dee Dee Halfhill. She was in his book, or I'm sorry, she was in Brene Brown's book. That's right. So there's a few airmen featured in books, which always catches your attention when you're an airman, because you hear an airman in some, millions of copies sold of this book, and you hear an airman's name, and it really grabs your attention. And so Colonel Dee Dee Halfhill was in Brene Brown's book, and then you were in Simon Sinek's book. So that always stood out to me, and I took note of it. And I remember just thinking, like, I'm in the Air Force. Like, where is this guy? Like, is he still around? Is he still in? Like, I was at Whiteman Air Force Base. There's A-10s here. Is he stationed at Whiteman perhaps? So I started trying to find you around base and look into you, but it was a guard unit at Whiteman, or a reserve unit. And so they weren't super, they're like, no, I don't think he's stationed here. And I kind of gave up on it. I probably should have just checked the global, but I didn't want to be weird and just, blind email you. But
no, not at all.
I say all that to say you're a living legend. I remember being blown away by you then. And the fact that I ran into you all these years later after learning about you is just, it just shows you the power of human connection. Things just go full circle sometimes. And here's another weird coincidence we have. We're both friends with Simon Sinek.
Right. Yeah. Well, he's amazing. And the depth and the connections that he has is just incredible. And he's so giving with his time with the military. I think he is good friends with Colonel Halfhill as well. So he does have a connection there. And he's so selfless with his time as far as leadership development goes and those type of things. And so I feel very lucky that he is an amazing friend. Just really, really great person. And that it's an awesome circle, like you said.
It's amazing. I say friend. He's your friend. To me, I just call him my friend. He doesn't call me his friend, and that's okay. Okay, that's okay. But I did have breakfast with him and dinner with him.
Mm-hmm.
He meets a lot of airmen. However, I met him because I was a 12 Outstanding Airman of the Year, and one of the that comes with perks, right? Like you get tours, you get this and that. So one of the perks that year was breakfast with Simon Sinek. Quite the perk, right? I mean, that's an incredible opportunity. At that time, he was like really blowing up on YouTube, so I was well familiar with him. And so to just be sitting across from him all of a sudden at Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri, in the middle of nowhere essentially, mind blowing. And so I did want to show you this. I do have this book here, Leaders Eat Last. And on the first page here, I got it autographed by him.
Great. Yeah, that's phenomenal.
And he says, Josh, this is on March 8th, 2019. And he said, Josh, great to meet you. Remember, be the leader you wish you had, Simon Sinek.
Yeah.
And my wife got to spend time with him too. It was unreal.
Well, I'm sure he would call you a friend. Again, he's incredibly giving with his time. Unbelievably insightful as far as human connections, leadership, selflessness go. The Air Force and the DoD has just been a really lucky recipient of him giving his time. And he loves the connection. He loves being with airmen. He loves with people that serve a purpose that's higher than themselves. And so for me, when we talk and we get to hang out and those type of things, it's unbelievably recharging because you get to think about leadership, you get to think about those human connections, and he does it in a way where it's a conversation with you, where you get to be introspective and you get to really think about what can I do to help out the team. And he's really great at establishing those connections, figuring out how those pathways happen, so that way you can really focus on how can I be part of that. And so he's phenomenal. I can't say enough great things about him. Like I said, I'm really lucky to call him a friend. He is awesome.
And as an Air Force, we're super lucky, like you said, because there's so many celebrities and leadership gurus. And, when you're in the military and you spent, enough time like we've been in, there's so many amazing things about it that the civilian population just doesn't know about, right? They're just completely unaware of some of those awesome human connections. So to have this outside perspective, this celebrity in America, see what we bring to the table, acknowledge it, and then put it on a mass scale and spend time with us is like such a unique, amazing thing that he does. And so I wanted to start the conversation out by just giving him a shout out because it was something we both had in common. We both spent time with him, and we both see the tremendous value he's brought in our lives and for the Air Force. So it's been really cool. I've been watching a lot of your videos lately, and you have a good amount of videos. Which I find phenomenal. I'm an airman who shares his positive opinions and perspectives. It's becoming a little more common, but you were ahead of that curve. You had a TED Talk years ago that has millions of views on it, millions, which is absolutely phenomenal. So before we get into the topics, we discussed, I was hoping you could kind of run me through that TED Talk experience all those years ago and how that's kind of changed your life to this present day.
Yeah, so there was no real strategy behind it. In fact, a lot of it has to do with Simon. Simon had finished up Start With Why. He was looking into research material for his next book. He was down visiting Hurlburt Air Force Base, and down there he was talking to some folks from AFOTECH, and he was asking and inquiring about missions where there was a strong element of sacrifice involved with it, where it was one of those, hey, if I do this, I may die or get hurt or some of those type of things as you execute the mission. And the guys he was talking with was like, oh, there's this A-10 guy. He did a mission. If you ever run into him, you should ask about it. Just so happened I was down there for some training, like completely happenstance. And so they walked into a building and I was making copies of some flying products. And they were like, there's the guy. That's the guy we just talked about. And so we linked up and he asked about that mission and that story. And we had a chance to connect and just talk about what it was like and some of the conditions that we were under at that particular night. And then a couple months later, he called back and said, "Hey, I'm putting together a TEDx event out at Scott Air Force Base, and would you be willing to do it?" At the time, I didn't really know a whole lot about TED events. I hadn't seen them online or taken them in. So I just asked it, what does that involve? And he's like, "Well, it's just you talking about that mission." And so I was like, "Oh, it's like a briefing. Yeah, I can give a briefing on it." And it's like, no, it's not a briefing. It's a TED talk. And so as we got closer to the event, I did some research on it, saw the different business rules they have with the amount of time and the topic. And I called them back and I was like, "Hey, listen, I don't know if I should do this. This is a lot of talking about yourself. And that's kind of what our community does not like to do. We like to highlight how we help out the team and those type of things, but we don't like to really highlight our participation in it just from a standpoint of being grandiose and self-deprecating, and those type of things." And again, in a very insightful way, Simon brought up, he was like, "Hey, you're not doing it for you. You're doing it for the greater good. You're doing it to highlight what those airmen and what those soldiers and what those SEALs and all those different personnel went through. And then you're doing it because the business world can then see this and they can see that level of sacrifice and people doing things that are greater than themselves. So this isn't about you. This is about everybody else." And so that was really the talk that said, "Okay, I'm in, I'm doing it." And so went out and gave the talk. And then since then, I've always had the mindset of, if somebody wants to sit down and talk leadership or talk about those type of dynamics, and if there's a way that I can help, talk through the lessons that I've been through, so that way they can benefit from that, I won't turn that down. And so that's been my mindset ever since. It has been awesome to see. I was just out at Pax River. There's the joint simulation environment out there where our F-35s execute high-end training, high-end operational test. I'm a very basic level qualified F-35 pilot now, so I was out there seeing the team from Eielson execute, and a couple of the pilots came up and they asked, they were like, did you give a TED talk? It was called Fate's Worse Than Death. And I was like, yeah. And there was some good and the bad with it. They were like, "Man, when I was a kid, I used to just watch that over and over again," which stung a little bit because I'm realizing I'm getting old. But also at the same time, the fact that it helped a couple of them out say, "This is something I want to do and I want to be that someday," was really humbling from my standpoint. So I'm glad it's helped in some form or fashion. It means a lot. And again, if there's a lesson that I can pass along that I've either learned the hard way or the easy way, I'm all about doing that. And so again, I consider myself very fortunate that I got to be a part of that. And it means a lot. And again, I'm glad some folks found some value in it because I just hope I can help out the team by doing some of those things.
Absolutely. No, I mean, the impact that conversation had was obviously tremendous. And yeah, it's funny you mentioned feeling old, right? Because these young guys are coming up, young guys and girls saying, "Hey, I saw you when I was a kid." But there's nothing that will make you feel older than being in the military, because when the longer you stay in, you become that old person really pretty quickly. Oh, yeah. Only 10% go to 20 years, 10% or less. And so you get to a certain point where 90% is younger than you. I mean, that is unusual, right? Like if you go to the civilian side, you'll all of a sudden be the young person. I'm doing that now. So I'm in a skill bridge with public affairs, and it here at Eglin, it's one of the only civilian driven public affairs stateside Air Force. The whole office is just civilians. And so real quick, I became the young guy again. It was like I went from old guy, master sergeant, to civilian young guy in the blink of an eye. So it's one of those, it just made me realize, like, wow, that is unusual that we're the old guy when in reality, we're not that old.
Yeah, there's a lot of indicators out there. I throw out movie quotes occasionally and nobody gets them anymore. And that's a leading indicator of I'm starting to get up there in age and the generational shift is happening. Yeah.
The generational shift was happening when we say Step Brothers quotes and they just look at you with this blank expression. Like when that day happened, I was like, yes, that I am old. That was the marker for me.
That was the indicator. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So General, just again, want to thank you so much for spending time with us. A living legend. The military is one of the only places you can meet living legends. And so what a special opportunity to sit down with you. And so here's some of the topics that, we kind of agreed to discuss today, which There is 5 of them. The first one is the A-10, the Warthog, a plane that's close to your heart in so many. My brother-in-law, Mike Stevens, he is a senior master sergeant at Whiteman Air Force Base. The Warthog is his heart and soul. And so I got to see it at Whiteman. It's a very special plane, very special mission. And I see the maintainers and the crews and just how much they care about it. So I wanted to talk about the Warthog and then some of your close air support stories, kind of going back to your TED Talk. Also, the second topic, leadership under pressure. So your leadership philosophy, particularly during life or death combat missions, which is a rare perspective that barely anyone on this planet can speak on. You're one of those few. The brotherhood of ground and air forces, I got to see that. I used to be maintenance. I've had 3 career fields. So I was aerospace ground equipment. I was public health, which had to deal with the pandemic. Had to help run that. Not easy. And any general commander was, hand in hand with a med group at that point. So the work that went into that. And then my third career field was funeral honors. I did that for the state of Missouri for 2 years, which was my proudest Air Force achievement. Then topic number 4, mental resilience in combat stress. And then the last topic, transitioning lessons from combat to life. And, you and Simon talked a little bit about that, about the civilian sector. And I got to tell you, I'm going through that firsthand right now. You were my first interview after a 3-month hiatus, the only break that I have ever taken in 4 years. You're the first one. I'm in my new life, right? I got overnight this happened. Overnight I was not in the uniform. I worked with all civilians. I was in a new job. I was in a new house because you can't be retired and live on base. New life. It was almost like I woke up from some dream, and it is hard for your brain to understand this new reality. And so I really appreciated you talking with Simon about that. But before we get into all those topics, let's hear a little bit about your upbringing, right? One thing I've learned about all generals that I've spoken with is they've had a really impactful, strong upbringing that kind of ushered them into this role that they're at today. And so before we hit the topics, I was hoping we could kind of figure out who you are and where you came from and a little bit about you.
Yeah, so military brat. My dad was in the Air Force. He flew fighters, F-4s, O-2s, F-15s. And so I graduated from high school in Alamogordo, New Mexico, where Holloman Air Force Base is. When you talk about that scary transition, it's scary for me. I'm a bit institutionalized because the day I turned 18, I got to the Air Force Academy prep school. And then my dad retired about 7 or 8 months after that. So have not been out of uniform or out of the Air Force, if you will, my entire life. I was born at Luke Air Force Base and still consider myself lucky to continue to serve. Air Force Academy. I really look at how I got to where I am today and where I've been. There is a lot of luck involved. I look back on it now. I can't believe I got into the Air Force Academy. So I view myself as extremely lucky there. When I came into the Air Force Academy, it was during the constriction after Desert Storm. So there wasn't a lot of pilot training slots available. They actually stopped pilot training for about 2 years. They banked pilots going to pilot training. And then as I approached my senior year, they opened it back up to about 275. And so I was lucky enough to pick up one of those. Went to pilot training down in Pensacola with the Joint Specialized Undergraduate Pilot Training Program. So we had an exchange going on with the Navy for a little bit. They stopped it, I want to say 10 or 12 years ago. But so I did the first portion of primary training down at Pensacola at Whiting Naval Air Station, then went to Vance for T-38s. Selected the A-10 out of there, and then went down to Davis-Monthan for my initial qualification training in the A-10, and then did my first assignment out at Osan Air Base. That's where I met my wife. She was in the med group at the time as a dentist, and so she unfortunately had an assignment to Germany, and so I was like, oh, they got A-10s at Spangdahlem at the time, so we're looking to get married, and we can get a joint assignment to Germany, but the Air Force personnel system had a different game plan in mind. They were like, we got plenty of A-10 pilots in Germany. We don't have enough Davis-Monthan, so she could be a dentist down at Davis-Monthan. And so I kind of derailed that plan, and we ended up down at Davis-Monthan together. Much like many people that have served, that's when September 11th, 2001, hit, and that very just significant day. And that was prior to me going to the weapons school. So I'd been selected to the weapons school, which is, the way that I always describe it, kind of like Top Gun for the Air Force. I hate that moniker for it, but that's kind of what it's like. You go there and they teach you to be the chief of weapons and tactics. And so I went to the weapons school while we were en route to Pope Air Force Base. That's when the A-10s were still there. And as soon as I showed up to Pope, immediately deployed. It was the beginning of Operation Enduring Freedom. And we were standing up operations out of Bagram Air Base. They'd been there for a little bit of time. We were kind of solidifying that. Was over there for about 5 months, redeployed, came back to Pope, and then immediately started the planning for what would become Operation Iraqi Freedom. And then left in February that year, deployed to Operation Iraqi Freedom. Was there again for about 5 or 6 months. And then after that, was lucky again where I had a number of assignments at Nellis Air Force Base associated with the weapons school. And the weapons school, while I just described it as kind of like the Air Force's version of Top Gun, it's so much more than that because it's focused on leadership development, critical thinking. It really was, I would say, a pivotal moment for me to reflect on the leader I wanted to be, the person I wanted to be. I was the recipient of just being around amazing people and amazing leaders. And so, when you're like in the introduction, to be with a living legend, I really don't consider myself that. The people that I got to work with were. They were just phenomenal, did amazing things. And I mean, the cadre that I was around just were unbelievable people. And I got to watch them day in and day out. And I hate to phrase it this way, but I just steal from them. The great leadership techniques that they had, the way they interacted with people. And so an unbelievable recipient of that. So I got to be an instructor, squadron commander, the commandant of the weapons school, and then also the 57th Wing Commander. And so that was kind of the cumulative time that I got to spend out at Nellis Air Force Base. Also within that, went out to the Air Force Academy, where I got to go through my master's program and be an air officer commanding for a cadet squadron. And then on the commander's action group for the superintendent. That, again, was another pivotal, I would say, leadership moment for me because the whole program is focused on leadership development. How can you build leaders of character? How can you do that within yourself? How can you help others achieve that? And so that was just another 3-year period where it was really focused on leadership. And so I got to spend the time doing that. Also in that period, I got to go to, later after my squadron command tour and commandant tour, I got to go work in the office of the Secretary of Defense. And then I also went through National Defense University to the Joint Advanced Warfighting School. And that's where I would say a lot of the thinking evolved into operational planning and strategy, which I love. I consider myself a bit of a strategy nerd and how to study that, craft that, implement that. And so, and then really the relationship between policy and the military, just a fascinating subject for me. And then spent some time deployed over in Al Udeid for a year, the wing commander down at Davis-Monthan. Most recently, I was out at Indo-PACOM, where I was the director of exercises out there, and that was an incredible experience as far as, again, what we see as challenges in the world and how we are trying to make sure that we are postured to be successful. And now I'm at the Air Force Operational Test and Evaluation Center, which, again, is I've been lucky. I haven't had any bad assignments out there. This has been a great one in looking at the future of the Air Force, where our test programs are now, where are they going to be in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and then just working with some incredible airmen, civilians that are helping us develop those things. So that's about the 30-second trailer. I know it was a little bit longer than that, but that's kind of the trailer of the movie of where I came from and where I am today.
No, I think that's incredible. There's a few things that stuck out to me. For one, I'm 4th generation Air Force. My dad, this goes back to my great grandfather as a pilot in the Army Air Corps. And then, up to both my grandparents. My parents met in Turkey because both my grandparents were stationed there. So although my family's from West Virginia, and a big country, they're all know the Turkish language. They know how to make all the food. So they're kind of an anomaly of sorts. and then my daddy did 26 years. And so to hear that, you know, you're following in your dad's footsteps, that's a special thing that I also carry with me. And I'm very fortunate enough that, you know, he was the officer that swore me in, and then
Oh, wow.
Major
Yeah,
Kate
same here.
Hewlett.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
That is amazing. Major Kate Hewlett, she set this up and caught me off guard with this. She planned this with my dad, but he actually read my retirement order. So, you know,
Oh,
in a
wow.
way, he
Yeah.
also retired me. So, you
Yeah.
know, to try to not just, you know, break down in that moment, I had to really go to another place.
Yeah. Yeah. That was strong. Yeah.
So to hear that you had that relationship, you know, that really fills us with purpose, that we just
Mhm.
can't even quite explain sometimes. So I really appreciate that about you. And yeah, your career has been, wow, you've gone step by step by step to see every aspect of the mission at every level, you know, to be the leader that you are now, which is really cool. The Air Force does a great job with shaping someone who wants to do 20 plus years, you know, and getting your head into space that you didn't even know existed until you're there.
Oh, yeah.
AFOTECH, love your team. I've met them at AFSA. They have an incredible display. I've interviewed the whole team that was there. I interviewed them.
Yeah.
And they're just phenomenal people. I love talking
Yeah.
with them. And then recently I saw AFOTECH here. Here at Team Eglin, we got together for this conference off base that was kind of you know, weapons technology and where that's going and all the innovative things people are doing. So of course AFOTECH was there. And I got to play with the robot dog. Like how
Yeah.
I got to, you know, the guy running it was like, yeah, I don't let people like try it out. And then I was like, I'm going to change this guy's mind. So I get to talking with him. He's a medic. He was public health. He was like, we had so much in common. We got to know each other. And I said, okay, now can I play with the dog? He was like,
Yeah.
all right, fine. Just you though. So AFOTECH's got a really special place in my heart just because knowing them for years from the AFSA conference, going to now seeing a whole nother side of them here at Team Eglin. What an incredible, innovative mission.
Yeah.
They're so much wider and more diverse than I ever realized until I got to know different sections of AFOTECH. You know, how has that been for you being in that seat?
It's been a lot of learning, but what's amazing is they're an incredible family, and so very tight knit, very close relationships. They have been just unbelievably not only welcoming, but just I would say empathetic on here's how we're going to help get you smart, which is a tough act to help get me up to speed. Everybody asks like, "Hey, are you a visual learner? Are you an auditory learner?" I'm like, I'm a hard learner, so that's what it requires to try and figure everything out. And they've been phenomenal as far as that goes. And then again, in executing the mission, AFOTECH is really a lot about relationships. You're balancing a test program that's going through that has a lot of cost and schedule considerations that are associated with it, and then performance considerations that are associated with it. And there's multiple stakeholders involved, and they do just a great job of communicating where that test program is at, what needs to happen, what we're finding and discovering, with the mindset of we are here to help the team. We are here to deliver performance to the airmen, and things that we're figuring out, how can we communicate that early so that way the team can work it. And so I feel unbelievably fortunate that I've come out of a joint job into this Air Force level job because again, it allows me to wrap my arms around where we're at as an Air Force and where we're going. And then to do that with a phenomenal team is just, again, I feel like a kid in a candy store. I'm unbelievably lucky.
That's amazing. And I want to give a shout out to Catherine. Are you familiar with Catherine?
Yeah.
Do you work with her?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. She's phenomenal. Yeah. That AFSA booths and the programs and everything that she does from a public affairs and outreach standpoint is just incredible. She's so phenomenal.
She has that vision. You know, I think there's two different types of PA. Now that I'm in an internship and I'm kind of seeing it too, there's like a by the book, very cautionary approach to it. Kind of like, hey, let's do one photo, let's do a basic article, and that covers our bases. And then you got other folks who are like, hey, but the space in PA is changing. The news is changing. There's social media. There's so much more to it to explore and deep dive and leverage. So there's kind of two different modes of thinking, and Catherine is definitely one that sees the bigger picture, sees where we're going, And she's a big reason I'm in PA right now, because she,
Yeah.
she kind of believed in me and she challenged me, because I've always been capturing airman stories as a hobby. How do I become a professional at doing that? And when I met Catherine, she was all about helping me and educating me. And so I do want to give her a special shout out during this talk too, because she is such a phenomenal teammate that's been a part of our mission for so many years. And she works completely behind the scenes, and she never gets that shout out. And today she's getting that shout out.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, she's wonderful. And like I said, just unbelievable with her vision and everything that she's executing. Unbelievably lucky to have her.
And she's going to listen to this before it's released. So I bet her mind is blown like right at this moment, And if you ask to take this part out, Catherine, it ain't happening. It's staying in. You're getting the shout out whether you like it or not. And that's why I like doing what I do, by the way, General, is because like you kind of touched on earlier, there's a certain humbleness. Staying humble helps us stay focused, right?
Mm-hmm.
It allows us to never lose sight of why we joined. It helps, basically as a human being, we're susceptible to pride, arrogance, ego. It's a basic human thing. And the humble nature that we try to always remind ourselves of, that human nature, keeps us grounded. And so you're right. We don't, like you coming on TED Talk, you're like, why would I do that? Like, we don't do that. But why I love doing what I do, is because you can't do that, but let me do that for you. Let me be that person to highlight you. The joy that I've gotten from doing that has been absolutely tremendous. And so that's kind of been my twist on the service, my own special touch that I've liked to add. But there is a caveat to that pride and that passion that we have. We might not be like that for ourselves, but we are like that for the team.
100%. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's where we exercise the bragging, the pride. Like it is there. It's just for the team. And I think that is such a beautiful approach that we have, that, I'm getting all like emotional and philosophical here because I'm retiring.
Yeah. No, yeah. And that's I think what's so special about our culture and our this organization, this thing that is the military that we're a part of, are those bonds and that understanding of, hey, we don't talk about ourselves, but we talk about the team. We talk about how great they are. If something gets messed up, I did it, but if we succeed, then we did it. And that's a huge part of what it is, and that's a challenge, I think, going to the business culture where sometimes that's not always the case. And it's maybe a little more challenging to find out there. While it's an expectation for us.
Absolutely. And you and Simon kind of talked about that transition. And I think you even asked him like, hey, how could someone like a veteran that's a real go-getter, when they get to that civilian side, like how does that play out? Can they keep those core values? Can they influence change? Like how does that work? And I think Simon said they absolutely could, as long as they believe they can. And in being someone going through it now, I will tell you, you absolutely can shake things up. And you will have two different reactions to it. You will have this is the greatest thing that's ever happened. I love what you're bringing. Let's do it. But I do also want to kind of, give people caution that not everyone will accept it with open arms. You might have someone who, let's say the bare minimum is getting by, is enough, let's say. And suddenly you've changed that bare minimum. Not everyone will appreciate that with open arms. So there are two different, just speaking from experience, there's two different approaches that you can get when you join that team and you try to be that go-getter airman. You will get treated in two different ways. Does that mean you should change your approach? Hell no. You should still be getting after it. But you can be that change. You can be that catalyst for an organization. One person can definitely do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So General, thanks for going through all that talk. Thanks for letting me go down memory lane and reflecting on my own service. You're talking to me at a very unique time in my life. So thank you for entertaining that.
Yeah.
But this is your episode. And so let's talk about the A-10, the Warthog. Why is that so special to you? And then I kind of want to go back I want to revisit that TED Talk because it's been a long time. I think it's over 10 years since that's happened, right? And I don't want folks to forget that story. I want even the new folks to hear it. And so I was hoping you could kind of tell us why the A-10 is special to you. That story that you told at TED Talk, to kind of revisit that, because there's so much there to unpack. There's leadership, there's being under pressure, there's decision making,
Mm-hmm.
the ground and Air Force brotherhood and sisterhood.
Mm-hmm.
And so, would you be comfortable kind of revisiting that story all these years later?
Yeah, so well, the A-10 and its close air support mission really is a mindset of, hey, the things that we're doing, it's not about us. It's about supporting either a team on the ground, a pilot that may be in need of rescue, and those type of things. It's actually not unique. I would say that is what the Air Force stands for. Is every AFSE, a specialty code job, platform mission. I think in general approach it of, hey, I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing it to deliver on the mission and provide results. But in particular, that is what the A-10 stands for. That close air support is to provide uh, for either teams, units, um, maneuver type forces that are on the ground. And so that really resonated with me when I was selected to the A-10, and it was kind of one of the first speeches I got in that A-10 qualification of, hey, by flying this airplane, this is what you're signing up for. And so that meant a lot, and that's why the community, no matter what you look at, what they've done throughout, it has always been with that mantra or that credo in mind, if you will. Yeah, and so that particular mission that I talked about in the TED Talk was really somewhat of a reflection of that. That was early on in Operation Enduring Freedom, and so it was in the summer of the 2002 timeframe. We were providing a lot of special operational support, from either overwatch of a high-value target, escort to and from the target, or just generalized support as it would pop up dynamically. And so this one was a little bit of a mix of all the above. So actions on a high-value target had completed. They were now getting back to a safe area, so that way they could kind of get reconstituted and those type of things. And when we came in to provide that support, they were in that transit. And so not the greatest of weather nights. There was a pretty significant overcast deck. Trying to figure out at the time how we would navigate that. We didn't have the greatest maps to operate off of. This is back in the A-10A days, so I'll date myself there. We didn't have the multifunction color displays that we have now. Not a whole lot of moving map displays. The moving map was really a hard copy Russian map that you moved up and down with your forefinger and thumb. That was how you moved the map. And so how we got below the weather to operate was still a little bit of a risky procedure. We tried to mitigate as much of that risk as we could with trying to remove as many variables as possible. But when I checked in with the team, they were getting some indications that there would be some form of ambush or some sort of attack on the convoy as they were making their way to where they needed to go. And so that happened pretty shortly after we checked in. And so immediately had to execute one of those procedures to get below the weather, so that way we could support the team. Luckily, a lot of smart folks put a lot of time and effort in figuring out how best to do that. And so when I executed it, it worked like it was supposed to. It was still not the funnest thing I've done in the world, but was able to get below the weather by flying the procedure. And then once I broke out from the weather, it was pretty low in mountainous terrain, kind of a canyon-like environment. And then immediately saw, because it's nighttime and we're flying with night vision goggles, could see the team engaging enemy forces and the enemy forces engaging with our friendly team out there. The other thing, when you talk about close air support, it's really detailed integration in close proximity to friendly forces. And the reason why that little statement is important is because there's a degree of risk that you don't want to inadvertently injure your own forces while you provide that support, which means there's a lot of detailed procedures to help you out with that. And it's also, if things have gotten to that point where they're that close, it's a fairly confusing environment by the nature of when it's combat, and things are filled with what's known as fog and friction, which means that it's not the most clear set of a picture that you walk into. And so as soon as I broke out from the weather, it was really trying to figure out where were the friendlies at, where was the enemy at, and how could I help the situation and do it without hurting our own friendlies. Again, luckily, I'd been through an immense amount of training that prepared me for that situation, and now could put it into effect. And so when I got where the target locations were, where those enemy forces were, could start engaging with them pretty quickly. In those type of situations, things move really rapidly, and you start expending ordnance, which I started doing. And so I had a wingman with me. And then it was a case of initially I left my wingman up above the weather because I didn't know how hard it was going to be to get below the weather. After I executed that, it was a case of now getting my wingman below the weather, which we were able to do, and then continue to support the friendly convoy that was on the ground. And so at the end of it all, we were able to successfully engage the hostile forces. We were able to support the friendlies. And everything that we had trained to do, again, through just a lineage of leaders and instructors that had passed that on to us, we were able to execute. And to me, it was one of those moments where it was like everything that I had been through training-wise in the A-10, the weapon school, and those type of things had paid off in that moment. And again, getting it beat into me of like, hey, those things that we do it not for us. We do it to support something else that's bigger than us. And in that moment, it was supporting those special forces that were on the ground. And so that was kind of how we led off the TED Talk to discuss that mission. That was the one that Simon had heard about, where we formed that relationship. And so it meant a lot to me because it really brought all those things together. And in a moment of crisis, of high dynamic nature, things going on that are very confusing, the training really paid off, and was able to do the thing that I was supposed to do. And that meant a lot.
Wow. So, yeah, I don't think a lot of people that hear this out the gate, you talk about the weather part. They're like, okay, weather, what? But that's actually seriously dangerous for aircraft, like what you had to get through to even get to the fight. So when you say weather, you're talking about something that could potentially wreck your aircraft, right? Like that in and of itself was dangerous to navigate.
Yeah, not specifically the weather, but the mountain that's hidden in the weather is what gets pretty dangerous. And so those mountains in Afghanistan get up to the 15,000 feet. And so to get below the weather, a lot of times the mountains are hidden within. And so that's what you're really trying to work around to get beneath the weather. So now you can see what's going on to help support the folks that you need to support.
So it's the fact that all you see is fog, and you don't know if there's a mountain behind that fog. And the nature of the A-10 Warthog is to get close and personal. So there is no flying above the mountains. You're literally flying next to them and within them. And when you can't physically see, I mean, how terrifying is that? Not knowing what's beyond that fog wall. That's horrifying. How did you, find the courage to blindly fly through a canyon when you could hit a mountain at any moment?
Yeah, so it really gets to your second point of that courage under fire, if you want to call it that. I call it in extremis leadership, and so it's interesting. No matter what the spectrum is, I try and apply the same principles. And so whether it's in combat or getting shot, or public speaking, or even doing a podcast for this, there's times where I get nervous, and people are like, "Oh, you've given a lot of speeches, you've done a lot of podcasts, you've done a lot of talks. You must really enjoy speaking." And I'm like, no, I to this day still get nervous with that proposition of getting in front of a large audience and talking. Much like in that moment where you're like, I'm about to go through the weather where people are shooting. There's a team down there that needs me, but I could fly into the side of the mountain. That is a high adrenaline packed proposition. And so what I found, though, is in both of those cases, there's a lot of I that's bouncing around in my head at that time. Like, I'm worried about this. I may screw up. I may not do what I need to do. I may catastrophically fail. And what I try and remember again is getting back to that. Don't think about yourself. So at that moment, it was, I got to think about the team. How do I help them out? How do I help my wingman out? How do I help deliver? So I'm not thinking about myself in those moments. I'm thinking more about what needs to be done and how can I help everyone else out. And that gets me out of kind of that internally focused thinking to now externally thinking. And it's kind of the same thing again. If I go back to the public speaking, when I think about, I'm really nervous about talking in front of all these people. I'm worried I'm going to say the wrong thing. What happens if I mess up my words? That's me thinking about how I feel versus what kind of message can I provide? Can I pass along a lesson that will help them out? Can I give them something that will help them develop down the road? That changes, in my mind, the script from me being worried about myself to worried about something that's bigger than myself, and then I can deliver in those times. And so in that situation, yeah, there was some moments there where I was like, man, am I going to be able to do this? Will I mess it up? Will I hurt somebody that I don't want to hurt? Will I hurt myself? Will I hurt my wingman? Versus me thinking about how can I help that team out? How can I help my wingman out? How can I help this situation out? And changing it from thinking about myself to thinking about other. And so in both cases, I try and apply kind of the same mindset.
Wow. No, that's absolutely beautiful. Yeah, it's service before self. It's your team.
Right.
It's the mental focus shift that you had that allowed you to put the nerves aside, because those nerves could get you killed, right? Like you don't want
Right.
you want the nerves to help you, not inhibit your decision making, right? And that takes a
Absolutely.
lot of practice. That's training. That's mental fortitude. Like that's a lot of training and leaders that went into you being able to separate yourself, think about your team, and then not letting those nerves actually hold you back, but actually help you. Okay, so yeah, you're scared you're hitting the mountains, you're thinking of the team, your heart's probably beating a million miles a minute. You get that focus, you know you can do it, you have blind faith you can do it. And aside from the fog of war, you quite literally had fog in war. You break through
Mhm.
that cloud coverage, you see the landscape. What is the first thing you saw when you could finally see through that fog?
Yeah, so at night, with or without NVGs, a lot of times you can see the tracer fire. You can see some of the detonations from the explosions, and so that all pans out in front of you. And so it just so happened when I exited out of the fog, it was in front of me, and so could see that our friendly forces were along the canyon floor on the road. They were taking fire from higher positions. The first thing I start looking for that in that situation is to try and marry up the mental picture that I had built above the weather with what I was now seeing in front of me. So a lot of the relationship between us and the ground team is how can we build an accurate picture of what's going on so that way we can be a more effective in doing what it is that we need to do. So the number of vehicles that were in the convoy, how they were oriented, how they were marking themselves so I could see that, where they were taking fire from, all those things were built above the weather. So as I was going through the weather and now breaking out from the weather, I could quickly reconcile that picture that I had built mentally with what I'm now seeing with my eyeballs. And that allows me to now effectively do what I need to do to help support them. The other thing that I tried to do is in those situations, again, adrenaline's high, it's very confusing, there's a lot going on. There's what I've found a benefit to dialing it back from a standpoint of how I communicate with the team that's out there because emotions are high, adrenaline is high, it's very confusing. And so as I try and talk with the team that's out there in those type of situations, it is a conscientious effort to slow down just a little bit, try and sound pretty calm to help affect how that communication is going. And so as I broke out, I tried to be as calm as possible and describe to that team on the ground, hey, here's what I'm seeing. I see a convoy. There's 5 vehicles. They're oriented east to west. They've got about this spacing. I see the third one is marked with this type of device. I see fire incoming to now build a little bit of that confidence that I'm here to help. I'm trying to almost get the situation managed from a standpoint where we can effectively communicate with each other. So that way we can get done what needs to get done in that situation.
It's almost like you're like, hey, let me worry about this when it's over. Like let me get
Yeah.
through it
Yeah.
so I will worry later. I'll let future me do the reflecting, but the current me now,
Yeah.
I need to get through this.
Yeah, and there's quite a lot of that in the pilot community. We call that compartmentalization, and there's a good and a bad that comes with that. In the good, you are able to operate and effectively do what you need to do at the time. The bad that's associated with that is you kind of, like you just mentioned, bottle that up and say, I'll deal with this later. And where the warning comes into is you better make sure you deal with it later. Because if you bottle that up for too long and just kind of keep it tucked away and don't let it back out and kind of work through it, it can manifest itself in some pretty unhealthy ways. Now, again, luckily, I think in our culture within the military, us living together in a tent in a deployed environment, the barracks, the relationships, a lot of those are there so we can talk about those type of things after it's all said and done. Like, hey, I've been there, done that. Know you've gone through some stuff, and how does that work? Where the system breaks down and where there's risk is if you don't take that out of the box at some point and kind of work through it, talk through it, and make sure you're okay. And I mean, coming out of some of those sorties, I mean, there was times where landing, when it's been put in a box and you're sitting there now back at the home field, everything's safe. I can remember I'd be sitting there holding my brakes and my legs would be shaking, because it's starting now to kind of catch back up with you. And
Wow.
if you continue to keep it bottled up, that's where some negative things happen. And so that's why, again, it's not cliche. The thing that we talk about where it's like, hey, do you have a wingman to talk to? Do you have a support system? Do you have those type of things? Because when you're in those type of environments and in this day and age, doesn't matter, again, what your specialty code or what your job is. We all have the potential to be in those type of in extremist situations. You need to get the job done when you need to get it done, but you also have to work through what you went through at some point to kind of get back up on the step and do that maintenance and recover. That's got to happen at some point.
Right. I'm kind of thankful to be in a time in the military where that is more of a okay thing to bring up. I mean, a lot's changed even in the 20 years that I've been in. I remember being in maintenance, and my challenges at that time were being away from home. I was in Guam, and then I went to Japan. I missed funerals. I missed births. I missed all that, and that was hard for me. And I probably should have started talking to someone then, if I'm being honest. But the culture then, it was like, hey, no, like you're fine, just press. And I kept that mindset for many years. And so I think we're fortunate to be in a time now where like that's a little bit, it's like, okay, you are human. You did go through something. Okay. Let's discuss it now so that this doesn't manifest into something that's just out of your control one day. And you've seen that. You've seen it with people drinking. You've seen it with people doing drugs. And the sad truth is not everyone escapes that trauma. It consumes them. Right. And there's a lot of people losing their lives because they never escaped it. They never faced it, and it grows and it manifests. And so, I applaud you for kind of touching on that. And, you're one of the rare pilots out there who have seen combat. Our planes are so advanced these days. It's almost like no one would dare to approach it. But you are one of those rare pilots who pulled the trigger. You saved lives and you had to face combat head on, and you're still alive to talk about it. How have you, dealt with that? Did it surprise you that, it stuck with you for years, or did it not really faze you at all? I would love to hear your insight on how you've handled that all these years later.
Well, no, I mean, I think no matter what, it has an indelible effect on whoever's been in that situation. And I mean, it not only is with being shot at or having to shoot at something, in those type of environments where there's a lot of risk on the line and there's a lot of unknowns on the line, anybody can, I think, go through those same spectrums of having it have an impact on you. I think, and again, it's not the easiest thing to work through, just like you talked about. Like, how do you discuss it with somebody? How do you ensure that it doesn't result in behaviors that are destructive, that don't help? Because there's a lot of those out there where the things you do to deal with it don't help you out or help you work through it. And I think what I found is the best way to work through it for me is to figure out what I can pass along to help somebody else out. A lot of our airmen have been in combat. A lot of our airmen have had to make those type of decisions and execute those type of things. And so I've always looked at it as, hey, what can I pass along of, here's what I've learned from being in that situation. So that way, the next time we are in combat, the next time we are in those type of circumstances, I've passed those lessons on how to navigate within it and learn from it, and then how to recover from it when it's all done, and to trying to be an example from that standpoint. And so I think that's how I've tried to approach it. And I think a lot of folks, those are the lessons that we pass on from generation to generation. There are those lessons of, hey, this is what's going to allow you to be lethal. This is what's going to allow you to be survivable. And then when it's all said and done, this is what's important. Some of it's been informal and some of it's formal. Some of those formal programs out there, like our True North and our MFLAX and helping agencies that are out there along those things. Some of it's very informal. It's the intramural team that you're hanging out with. It's the, hey, let's go, have a coffee session, amongst a group and having some informal networks out there. All those things are there for a reason. And it's, in my mind, how can we be better as a team? And again, what I would call, how can we do preemptive and kind of post-mission maintenance on ourselves to make sure that we're taking care of what we need to take care of after we've been through things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've leaned into myself. It started when I was in the funeral honors. You talked about doing things where you have to check out, to get through it and not make a mistake, to rely on the training to kind of take the wheel. I see a lot of overlap with funeral honors with that, specifically the active duty funerals, right? That take the whole team. Like that's where the term 21 gun salute comes from. It's not a 6-man or a 2-man. It's 20 plus airmen. It's a powerful sight. And at Whiteman, we had 7 in 1 year, and you never know when they're going to pop up because it's their home of record where they're being buried. So you could see on the news an airman passed away in Japan, but their home of record might be Missouri. So suddenly you have 2 days to set this active duty service up. And there is truly nothing that has been harder for me than handing a flag to parents, to children.
Yeah,
it's absolutely brutal. And the training did get us through it. But after the fact, there'd be people crying on the drive back. It's hard to not absorb that. And you stand there and hear their whole story before it even begins. You're at attention. You hear their whole life story, right? So you kind of even know the person by the time you perform the honor guard stuff. And I did get help on the back end because you're right. During the moment, I was like, I can do this. I got this. I can do this, and I'm not going to mess it up. But then on the ride back, you're like kind of in shambles. You didn't realize how nervous you were. You thought you were fine until later, and you realize, oh wow, I really wasn't fine. And I used, we had True North just start at Whiteman, and we had Chaplain Kim, who was assigned to us an honor guard, and he helped tremendously. Like he set up places where we could talk about it, where we could, I saw firsthand the trust, that group, that team sharing things with each other. I saw the healing firsthand, and I've been a believer in it ever since that experience. So I appreciate you, General, kind of, advocating for that as well.
Yeah, no, again, I'm glad that those structures have been put into place. And again, we could always use more. It's always one of those things where it's a good thing and it helps out. But I would tell you that the informal ones help just as much, if not more, as well. And it can be the little things like your fantasy football team. It can be, like I said, just that group that you have. Again, I'll attribute this to Simon. He read a study where it takes 8 minutes to kind of work through some bad stuff that you're going through and have that discovery of when you're connecting with somebody else of like, hey, how do I exit out of this? And so he and I came up with a, kind of that like, hey, I need 8 minutes, and that's our little, like, can we just talk? Because I'm going through some stuff kind of thing. And if you can form that with somebody else or form that with a team of just like, hey, when I call you up and I say this, it just means I need a minute. I just need a minute to talk something out or just get something off my chest. Unbelievably helpful. And so that's why a lot of those informal structures of just being a good wingman, being a good friend are just as important as the formal ones.
No, you're absolutely right. I think, your squadron, your flight, there's so much, that's your family, that whether you like it or not, that's who you're spending most of your time with.
Yeah.
And if that's locked tight and you got a good team, good leadership, you got people that care, the trust is there. That's what keeps our attention. It's not a mystery, right? It's not some mystery formula we just can't get our finger on. It's the relationships, right? It's the trust. It's, do people believe in you? Can you confide in them? There's so much, it breaks my heart when I see, squadrons or even flights kind of just wonder why folks are leaving sometimes. And it's like, you can change that. You can. Don't think that you don't have an impact, because you totally have a tremendous impact. I mean, General Goldfein gave all a lot of the changes to the squadron because he attributed being a squadron commander as the most impactful spot in people's careers that you could possibly have.
Right.
Right. He saw that. And so he even rearranged things to where the squadron had more say and impact in the airmen's lives. Yeah. And so I think you're absolutely right. We should not ever think that we don't have an impact on someone's life. I mean, I've seen one conversation not only save an airman's life, but led them to stay in to this day.
Yeah.
Right. Like one conversation I've seen, and that was my own personal experience. A person confided in me. Mm-hmm. We had many long talks, and I didn't even realize the impact was there. Yeah. It was later when they said, "Hey, I actually didn't want to be alive, but I am now, and I re-enlisted, and I love what I do." Yeah. And I was thinking, that was just conversations.
Yeah,
it wasn't some magic formula. Like, and look at the impact that had. Yeah. And so I think you're spot on, General, with empowering our squadrons, our flights, our friends, our mentors. It has a huge impact, absolutely. And shout out to Simon Sinek, just dropping knowledge for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Always those little nuggets, those gems, they're great. Yeah.
Right. When's the last time you talked to him?
We talk pretty often. But a lot of the times it's friend check-ins. It's just us laughing about a meme that we saw or something along those lines. So, and then other times we get jazzed again about talking about strategy or leadership or, any of those type of things. So, yeah.
Right. Humor is a big part of it too, right? I remember I went through a real hard time with my retrain going from maintenance to medical. So I actually got a therapist then. That was the first time I ever done that. And I remember the one thing I'll never forget that he said, because I was taking myself so seriously. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was probably the most insecure I've ever been, which when you're insecure, you're putting up armor, you're putting up walls, everything you say, you question. It's a painful place to be in mentally. And he said, man, you need to relax. He's like, if you can't laugh at yourself, you are losing.
Yeah.
You're losing this thing called life if you can't even laugh at yourself. Come on. And I was like, wow, he's right. Like, I haven't laughed. I haven't smiled. I'm taking myself so seriously that I'm my own worst enemy at this point.
Yeah. I think that's the balance that I finally strive to hit and I tell my folks on my introduction to AFOTECH, I was like, listen, I don't take myself very seriously. I'm self-deprecating, but I do take the position that I am in very seriously, in that ability to take care of you, take care of the mission, deliver what it is that we're supposed to deliver. And so that's the balance that I try and strike. Like, I'm not going to get everything perfect. And, I can laugh at myself and, again, be able to unbuckle when I need to. But at the same time, in the pilot community, we call it, dark visor down, which means like, hey, it's time to job it, and in those moments, it's the ability to say, again, I take the position in the job I'm in very seriously. And that is to take care of our team and take care of the mission and get it done. And finding that balance helps out quite a bit, I think.
Absolutely. One of the last things I want to talk about, just while I got you still here, is you are one of the most rare positions in the world, which is a general, right? Very unique, where decisions you make impact the base, possibly the world, depending on what's presented to you. How do you navigate decisions like that, and how do you stay connected? Because I feel like that it would be hard to remember what it's like to be a new lieutenant or a captain, or and things have changed since then. So that ground level might be hard to stay on top of, as far as like knowing their culture and knowing where their head's at. What are some things as a general in the high position that you're at? Do you not only balance these important decisions, but you also find a way to connect to airmen still?
Yeah, that is part of the job, I think, is the ability to have that empathy, know what the team is going through across the layers, from the tactical to the operational to the strategic, to have that understanding and to know what the impacts of those decisions are. Not to say that it may change the decision that you have to make, but now you can explain it, you can communicate the why behind it. And so some of the conversations that you have to have is like, hey, listen, this is a tough decision that we had to make. It's not going to impact you favorably, but at the same time, this is why we got to do it, and this is why we're executing the strategy that we're executing. Or sometimes it does give you that perspective where you're like, I had a decision made, and now that I've heard where the team is, that lieutenant, that airman, and what it is that they see and what they're going through, we actually do need to go about doing this a different way. And so, if you find yourself anchored in one end of the other, then you're probably spending too much time too long in one place. If you're, living slowly in the tactical and getting that viewpoint and that empathy, then you may be missing the strategic bigger picture. If you're just disconnected and up in the strategic level and you don't have an understanding of how that is going to impact the airman that's got to go, load the gun on the fighter, or, provide the maintenance or execute the mission, then you're missing that. And so it really is an effort to make sure that you are exposing yourself to both, living somewhat in both worlds. And in my mind, for the sole purpose that you can make the best and the most informed decision that you can. And then more importantly, to be able to communicate that, to say, listen, this is why we're doing this, and this is why it's important. And providing that team an understanding of the importance that they're doing. Like, hey, you look at it as you're just showing up at this time to do this thing. Let me tell you how important that thing is that you're doing. Because of that, we can now go execute this. It builds deterrence in this area, forms relationships with our allies and partners. You name what it is. But now you can communicate that. And then at the same time, when you execute those strategic decisions, you can go like, hey, we can do this, but man, realize that team that's out there is going to be out there doing 20-hour days for X amount of time. That's not easy. So if we're going to do this, we need to make sure that is the best thing for this situation is for us to do. So it's not, like I said, I don't get it 100% right, but it's the thing I strive to try and do and provide the team as I go about doing it. So I see that as a way.
Wow, that's a balancing act.
Yeah. Yeah, and not an easy one, but that is the job. That is, in my mind, in being a generalist, a general officer, it's to live in both of those worlds, and then to really do it in such a fashion that you're looking 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, 10 years down the road, and try and provide the best decisions that you can now to help set the team up for the most advantageous position they can be in the future.
Right, and as a general, you're one of the people thinking that far ahead, and it's something I've come to learn talking with y'all too. Is that at the squadron and flight levels, like our world is pretty small. We're thinking week to week, month to month, quarter to quarter, right? Like we're not like, oh, what are we going to do 5 years from now? We'll be PCS'd at that point. We'd have moved on to something else. Like the generals are like the continuity of where we're heading, big picture. So it's something I really appreciate about y'all.
Yeah, and it's trying to now form those connections of that week, that quarter, that month to the longer term game plan, the longer term strategy, and again, being able to explain that and see how one leads to the other and help manage that. And so, no easy job. None of them are easy jobs, but that's why we do it, to try and solve problems and help the team out, right?
Absolutely. And why I love podcasts, by the way, is because it has such a wide reach.
Mm-hmm.
I remember being an airman and being at these big commanders calls and thinking, man, there's nothing bigger than this. But on the online space, it really is like 20 commanders calls at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
Which is a huge benefit of getting a message out. So I wanted to end with, you've seen war and strategy change dramatically, right? The things that what worries me as an airman, at the base level is, man, I don't know if what I was good at 20 years ago is even going to apply to today. Like, are those skills even going to work now? It has me reflecting on that. And so I was hoping you could end on kind of your message to the airmen, knowing what you know. Where should their head be at? What should we be focused on to be successful with this new world that we're going to be living in?
Yeah. So, it is a challenging and dynamic time. When you look across the globe, there's a lot going on right now. And the responsibility that we have to deter, and should deterrence fail, defeat and do so in a most winning fashion as we can possibly do it, that is the job. And so I would say the good news is when I get to go out and see our airmen doing the jobs that they do, and our team perform in their mission, they do so, one, in a fashion that is the most professional, just outstanding nature that they can do it in. And then even when we get a curveball that we were not expecting, our team always finds a way to figure it out. We may take a punch in the face, but we recover very quickly and we figure out how to win. And so the continued ability to do that, I think, is one essential, and it's one that we're known for. And like, again, I still see it day to day. And so that's an amazing framework for us to continue moving forward on. Now, having said that, we want to be as agile, adaptable, and I would say as resilient as possible. And so, number one, there is no negative downside to good leadership at all. Like I can't think of one thing, if you put your time and effort into being a good leader, where you would look at it and go, I don't know if I spent my time wisely. So the study of leadership, the study of how you can be a better leader, in my mind, will pay itself off no matter what it is that you want to go off and do in life, whether you want to stay 20 years in the military, you want to go start your own business, you want to be a stay-at-home parent, leadership will pay itself off. So be a student of leadership. The other thing is, in these dynamic times, we need to be able to deliver. We've got to be able to be competent and credible in our jobs, which means while you're in the military, be a student of the profession. Know your job, know the environment that we are in, study those world events, so that way, when crisis comes, you're ready for it and the training takes over. And so that's my recommendation to the team moving forward. Do everything you can to be a better leader each and every day. And then put your time and energy to be a professional, because we're in the profession of arms. And, at the end of the day, it's about getting the mission done. And we've got some challenging times in front of us. But again, our team has always delivered. I know they will continue to deliver. And so that's the footing that we need to be on as we continue moving forward.
Oh, beautifully said. And, I saw that firsthand too. I see a lot of, disgruntled veterans with those websites where it's kind of complaint driven. It's kind of drama driven stuff on Facebook. And you see that and you're like, geez, are we in a different time? Like, what's going on? But I got to deploy to Israel as a medic, not even as public health, like as a combat medic. I was assigned to a doctor, and it was all different services there. This was a few years ago. And when stuff got real, like everyone executed. I mean,
Yeah.
It was an amazing thing to see.
Yeah.
Different nations, different services seamlessly come together and make things happen.
Yeah.
So I'm reading all this
day,
stuff online about, oh, you could never deploy, y'all could never, and then to go out there and see us absolutely crush it.
Yep.
Was a sight to see.
I'm sure back in the Peloponnesian Wars, somebody was saying the same thing. If you can go do that, that is just part of our DNA. That's what we do. We gripe, we talk about how hard it was when we were there, but the team always steps up, like you said, and they will step up, and they are stepping up now. So it's just, we need to keep that focus. And again, if there's areas to spend some time, those are the two I recommend. So.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I know I've kept you a little over an hour, and I apologize for that, but there was one thing I missed. Mm-hmm. Your call sign.
Yeah, so I really wish there was something original to it. When I showed up to Korea, to Osan Air Base as a brand new lieutenant A-10 pilot, they were going through an operational readiness inspection at the time. So they were like, hey, listen, you got to get your local area orientation. There's a bunch of things we need to do, but we're going through this inspection. Just sit tight for a couple weeks. So I did. And when I emerged after the inspection, it was time to get into the job. And so this is where I was as a not so bright lieutenant back in the day. Immediately got to flying and into the academics, and just never took the time to figure out where the barbershop was, at Osan Air Base. And so by the time it was all said and done, I'm going up for my mission ready check ride. I am getting out of my aircraft, and at the time there was also a final flight going on for one of the members of the squadron who was getting ready to leave. So much of the squadron personnel were out there, to include my squadron commander, group commander, like wing commander, and they're walking by as I'm taking off my helmet, and the hair just goes everywhere. And everyone's just like, what's the deal with this guy? And so all of the call signs that had to do with hair that I think that were nominated, there was Elvis, there was Moose, as in the hair product Moose, not the animal. And then a really good friend of mine, amazing leader as well, nominated Johnny Bravo. And while they do the call sign ceremony, you're outside of the room, so you're not hearing them make fun of you, which they're doing. I heard the room explode, with laughter and cheers. And I was like, whatever it is, they just figured it out. And when I came back in, that's what they presented me. So that's how I got Johnny Bravo.
I mean, you got great hair.
Well, yours is phenomenal. Yeah.
We're both lucky enough to have
game respects game. You've got some phenomenal hair going on there. Very well done. Yeah.
We're both blessed to have the call sign Johnny Bravo because it means you got cool hair. So yeah. Great call sign to have, right?
Well, thanks. Same to you.
And thanks for sharing that, sir. Yours is a lot better than me getting made fun of on the internet. Okay. So, General, we talked about the A-10 Warthog. We talked about your close air support stories, getting through that fog, being there for airmen. We also talked about how you kind of unpack that on the back end and the importance of, being honest with yourself and finding someone to talk to about it. So the transitioning lessons from combat to life, the mental resilience, Simon Sinek, TED Talk, AFOTECH, we talked about it all today. And I wanted to just take a moment to thank you for that, for being there for us for so many years on so many different levels, tactical, operational, strategic, and to still be showing up for airmen to this day after everything you've been through. You are one of a kind. We're so lucky to have you, and I want to thank you for coming on the Hero Front podcast today.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. But more importantly, congratulations to you on your transition to Act 2. And as you do it, you're continuing to serve. And so thank you, one, for your formal service, but thank you for everything that you're continuing to do, highlighting airmen, their stories, and taking care of the team. So very humbled to have been here and been a part of this. I appreciate the invite. And really, thank you so much for this. It's been a great conversation. Didn't even feel like work. I just loved talking with you. And so I had a blast.
Absolutely, sir. That's the point. Hey, that's a good sign. You had fun doing it. That's what's important.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to the very end. This was the hero's journey of General Michael Johnny Bravo Drowley. And we're out.